Candidate Forum, brought to you in partnership with the City Club of Central Oregon and the League of Women Voters of Deschutes County. Two organizations that are passionately nonpartisan and whose purpose today is to engage and inform Oregon voters for the general election. Today we are hosting candidates for State Representative District 54. My name is Kim Scott, League of Women Voter Deschutes County past president, and I am honored to serve as moderator today. First, I'd like to give a quick shout out to City Club's annual sponsors and the League of Women Voters of Deschutes County members. Without their support, we would not be able to bring you today's program. Today's live stream is made possible by Connect Central Oregon, a nonprofit launched with the assistance of OSU Cascades Innovation Collab. Our sponsors for the entire series of candidate forums is the Deschutes Public Library and Buchanan Schmidt LLC. We are grateful for their support for these forums. If you are interested in supporting City Club or the League of Women Voters, please check out our website to get more information. Our candidate forums are conducted according to League of Women Voter guidelines. All candidates filed in their race are invited to participate in the forums, and we hope to present voters with all participants. In the interest of fairness, we do not let an RSVP of regrets cancel a forum. Thank you to the State Representative District 54 candidates, Jason Kropf and Cheri Helt, for participating in today's forum. We appreciate the gravity of committing to run for office, and our goal is to provide an opportunity for fair and civil discourse. The Oregon House of Representatives District 54 is the donut hole part of Central Oregon's District 53 and 54. It includes most of Bend. It is one of the 60 House seats in the Oregon State House of Representatives, and each House member serves a 2-year term. We are starting with opening statements. Each candidate will have 2 minutes for their opening remarks, and for each question, each candidate will have 2 minutes to answer. At the end, each will have a 2-minute closing statement. For opening statements, we have randomly selected the order, and closing statements will be in the reverse order. Our questions come from a combination of League and community submitted questions. Questions will be given in a rotating manner. So let's get started. Jason, you're the first for your introduction and opening statement. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Kim. Thank you, League of Women Voters, for having me here today, and thank you, City Club. I'm Jason Krupp, and I'm running to represent Bend in the State House, House District 54. I've been a deputy district attorney here in Bend for the last 15 years, and before that, I was a public defender. Much of my career has been spent in our juvenile justice system, working on cases involving kids in foster care and kids in our delinquency system. Far too often in my work, I will show up to court and I'll see a 13 or 14-year-old kid for the first time. And I'll realize that I know that young person's father or mother or older sibling or uncle. And I don't know those family members from soccer or some other social activity in our community. I know them from their other court cases. I deal, in my work, I see people in crisis every day. I see the effects of lack of investment in all Oregonians in my work every day. I'm running because I know we can do better. I know we can do better for all Oregonians. I'm running because better to me means making sure making sure everybody has access to the medical and mental health care that they deserve. Better to me means making sure we have a fully funded school system that works for all kids, so all of our kids are having the opportunity to reach their fullest potential and being prepared for their future. I'm running to make sure that we're tackling the affordable housing crisis from all angles. Everybody deserves to have a safe and stable place to live. And I'm running to make sure that we stop just talking about climate change and start taking real action on climate change. That is also the crisis that we are under right now. We need to make sure that we're protecting this beautiful place for our future generations. I'm running because I know if we come together that we can tackle Oregon's biggest challenges. I know we can do better for Bend, and I know we can do better for Oregon. I look forward to this discussion. Thanks for having me today.
Thank you very much, Jason. Cheri, your opening statement?
Thank you, Kim. Thank you, Scott, behind the control room, and the student who's working with you. Also, thank you, City Club and the League of Women Voters, of course, on our 100th year women's anniversary to vote. So thanks for the opportunity to speak today. Today, unfortunately, we learned stunning and sad news from Jason and his campaign. Jason was forced to admit that his largest campaign donor tried to intimidate and silence a sexual harassment survivor from his own workplace, the DA's office. Jason is now returning thousands of dollars in campaign contributions, trying to save himself from the actions of his campaign supporters. That is a clear admission of wrongdoing. I asked Jason about this last night in our debate, and he refused to answer. But today, with his career on the line, he's suddenly willing to speak. This election is about who you want to be your voice in Salem. I'm not afraid to use my voice. I'm not afraid to speak my truth to power, to my party, and even when it's not easy. Jason has failed this test. He owes Jasmine a public apology and the voters a more detailed explanation of how this attempt to silence this survivor has happened on his watch for his own political gain. Thank you.
Thank you, Cheri, for your opening statement. Jason, we're going to be going directly into the questions now, and you can use your time as you see fit. Our first question: during the 2021 legislative session, you will be redrawing legislative districts following the completion of the 2020 census. What will you do to ensure that the districts are fair and equitable, representing the people, not politicians?
Thank you. I'm gonna, whoops, oh, sorry. Let me respond to what Representative Helt just said. As soon as I learned that an endorser had reached out to this woman, to Jasmine Troncoso's attorney, suggesting silence during about the campaign publicity that had been raised, I publicly spoke out against any efforts to silence her and return contributions to that organization. I believe very strongly that a survivor's story is her own, and I would never attempt to silence a person's story. To Jasmine Troncoso, I want to be clear. I respect you, and I in no way dismiss your truth. I would never undermine your access to justice. Representative Helt, you've asked me to compromise my professional and personal ethics repeatedly, and I have told everybody over and over, it is not appropriate for me to weigh in on an open case in my workplace. I am not going to do anything that would jeopardize Ms. Troncoso's or anybody else's access to justice for my own political gain. Please stop distorting my record. Stop compromising access to justice for Ms. Troncoso and others involved. I understand you'd rather mislead voters about your record. I'd rather mislead voters about my record than to talk about your record. But it's time for open and honest conversation about the issues. Sexism, racism, and harassment are absolutely issues that need to be spotlighted here in Bend. I've made clear my commitment to addressing them and ensuring a safe and just Oregon for everybody. Our public schools, economic recovery, affordable housing, addressing climate change, those are also issues we need to discuss and get clear answers on our visions on how to move Oregon forward.
Would you like to address the legislative session and redistricting?
Sure, I don't want to go over my time. You know, we have, every 10 years we do a redistricting. That process.
15 seconds, I said. Go.
Go ahead.
We have, after every census, we do redistricting. That process, we need to make sure that we're having a fair process, that everybody has, that process is fair and independent, and there's a voice for everybody in that process to make sure we have.
Thank you very much. That was
a
good answer.
All right.
Cheri, would you like me to repeat the question?
No, I think I got the question.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Kim, for your question. First, I will address your question. I supported the ballot measure that did not make it onto the ballot because of COVID, both times that it's been brought forward. I don't believe that this should be a partisan process. I believe having active partisans like my opponent in this discussion really skews how the boundaries are drawn and really affects our politics. I really think that more districts should be, more fair and have more equal representation, have them be more competitive, so we have more competitive candidates instead of more safe districts. And we have not seen that process happen in Oregon. So that is a really, really important discussion. I do want to, my opponent is, I want to address my opponent's remarks. My opponent is in charge of his campaign, and he took money from the trial lawyers when his boss does not take money from trial lawyers. I have asked for him to return that money as his job that we pay him publicly $115,000 a year to do is to defend against those trial lawyers. And so I'd asked for that before. He did not return that money, but now he has stated that he will. I also want to point out that he still has not apologized to Jasmine. Telling someone that you no way dismiss them is not an apology. You can do better, Jason.
Thank you, Cheri. Cheri, you're going to have the next question also first. What is your understanding of the Black Lives Matter movement, and how will you plan to support the BIPOC, or Black, Indigenous, People of Color community in your district?
Well, thank you so much, Kim, for that question. The BIPOC caucus is one that's very near and dear to my heart. I work with all of the members on some form of legislation over the last 2 years, but I am really honored in 2 of my committees to have Representative Alonso Leon, my chair in the Education Committee, of which I am vice chair, and then Representative Sanchez in the Human Services Committee as my chair as well. So I am very strong on working on this. This also comes back from my school board days, where we have worked really hard to expand out our dual immersion program in Bend and get teachers involved that were Native Hispanic speaking teachers. And we did this by finding people inside of our school district that were native Spanish speakers and getting them through chalkboard grants to be able to attend school. And this was an incredibly great effort. We were able to move that project all the way from K through 8 by expanding out our workforce. That's something I'm incredibly proud of. I'm also working on and we need to continue that work. We need to continue to make sure that teachers of color are able to be protected. I'm working on a law right now to make sure that when we consider layoffs, if the economic crisis worsens, that we do not lay off our teachers of color or our teachers from programs like dual immersion, because currently it's first in, first out, and that is not a policy that supports equity. So I'm working with leaders across the state on that, as well as the BIPOC caucus. I just really think that it's important that we make sure we have equity in our schools, and that our schools are able to serve all of our children, and everybody has a chance. And that's why I'm supportive of getting our kids back in schools, because our children that are most affected are from minority populations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cheri. Jason, same question. What is your understanding of the Black Lives Matter movement, and how will you plan to support BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, People of Color community in your district?
Sure. Thank you for that question. We know that systemic racism exists in our community and our state, and the inequities of that have existed for far too long, and we need to take real action to change it. We have to understand the issue, understand the historic causes, and we need to start doing real work to change that past, to have a more equitable and just community. To me, it's about putting everything on the table. Take a look at all our budgets, all our policies, all our laws. If something is perpetuating systemic racism, it has to be changed. One of the things I was very supportive of was the Student Success Act. The Student Success Act was a funding measure in the 2019 session to end 30 years of underinvestment in our Oregon public schools. What I really appreciated about that is, in that funding measure was an acknowledgement that our schools haven't been serving every kid. We know that 1 out of 5 kids in Oregon don't graduate high school. We know that number is larger when we're talking about kids of color in our schools. The Student Success Act has targeted funding to help those struggling students, to help make sure that our kids of color and our Indigenous communities have access to quality education, to begin the process of ending the inequities in our schools. I just couldn't believe when Representative Helt voted against that funding measure, voting against funding to help our marginalized communities. I'm also supportive of climate change legislation. We know that the environmental degradation has most impacted our marginalized communities. We need to take real action to reverse that trend and make sure all of us have access to safe and clean water and a clean environment. And I'm also was really surprised when Representative Helt voted against juvenile justice reform, especially when there was an acknowledgement of the racial disparities in our criminal justice system. I believe that juvenile justice bill was the beginning of making for a more equitable criminal justice system. I'm going to do all I can to make sure that we have an equitable and just community and an equitable and just state.
Thank you very much, Jason. The next question also will be your first. The Oregon unemployment benefit system has had major difficulties because of the outdated equipment and software. Many unemployed have gone weeks without benefits during the COVID-19 crisis. Money has been available from the feds to update the system since 2009. Who is responsible for overseeing this, and what will you do to fix this if elected?
Right. It was incredibly disturbing and troubling to see that people who are most in need right now of financial resources to keep afloat during this recession didn't have a timely access to them. You know, I think everybody, you know, it is another illustration of times when we haven't made proper investments in the infrastructures that we need to deliver on our commitment to all Oregonians. That has to stop. We've known about this problem, like you said, for a decade plus, and at the time that we really needed that system to work for all Oregonians, it let us down. It let so many people in the state down. That's got to stop. I am appreciative that the governor replaced the head of that department, and I'm appreciative that this issue has been highlighted so this doesn't happen again. You know, one of the things that we rely upon in government is to help out in times of crisis. We cannot have systems like our unemployment benefit system failing to help out Oregonians who are really struggling. I think it's another reminder of how you have to make timely investments in our social safety nets so that they're there to help everybody when the time comes. We just can't afford to have another problem like this to rear up, especially now as we're trying to deal with an unprecedented global pandemic and an unprecedented economic, you know, such a swift economic recession. I'm committed to making sure that we make those investments so that those social safety nets exist for everybody, especially in times like this when they're so needed.
Thank you very much, Jason. Cheri, would you like me to repeat the question? I'm sorry,
I'm
Cheri.
good. Thank you, Kim. Thank you for the offer of the repeat. First, I want to address something that my opponent said in his previous response. You know, I believe that when we are making sure that we have equity in our society and that people are welcome, it belongs in our workplace. So to talk about supporting people and minorities and people of color in the face of having a lawsuit in your own workforce is really disappointing. Secondly, I want to talk about stepping up for a community when COVID hit. COVID has been incredibly challenging for people. It has really hit people, working families, people that thought they had secure jobs have lost their jobs. The businesses have closed, their jobs are not coming back, they've lost their benefits, or they've lost more hours. And as we go into the fall, more of that's going to happen. I want to talk a little bit about what I have done since COVID hit. I've helped over 400 people out of my office that could not get unemployment benefits and secure those benefits for those people. It has been incredibly challenging, and we still have around 15 people this week that we will be submitting tomorrow to help through the unemployment department. This has been a full-time job helping people of Bend, and it's something I have been so honored and proud to do, is help people inside of Bend in their time of need. Also, from my private hat in my private business, my husband and I used our PPP loan and our community support from other business owners to help feed over 3,000 meals in our community. And the first week that we did that, we fed people who were denied unemployment benefits, just to give them a little lift up and a hand up. And that's the kind of leadership that I bring to Salem. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cheri. Jason? Cheri, you have the next question. What gun safety measures, if any, would you support?
Oh, I love this question. You know, I talked a little bit about stepping up to power in my opening statement. And I can promise you, one of the things that I learned in my first term was when you bring forward gun reform bills, you are going to have to make friends with the police officers in the building. That was the first death threat that I had to report to the state police, was when I brought forward a bill to ban bump stock. And I also worked on safe storage bills, and I have never had so much feedback and hostility towards me. And I continued and worked strongly and hard to make sure that we brought forward gun safety bills. I also brought forward another bill, which I think is important too. When we're talking about gun safety, we're also talking about school shootings, which unfortunately, I was the chair of the school board when a school shooting happened in Bend. And because of that, I wanted to make sure that we have secure vestibules in every one of our schools. Every one of our children deserves a safe environment in school. And that's one of the gold standards. So I worked with my school board members, our community, and our administrators and our voters. And we passed a bond to put forward secure vestibules in every one of our schools. But I brought forward a law to make sure that every school district in Oregon could have secure vestibules as well. And I think that that is something that's important with gun safety. And it's something that I've been proud to work with my community to do, and something that I've been proud to step up to do inside of my community. So I will continue to support safe storage measures and limit access to dangerous attachments for guns. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Jason, same question. What gun safety measures, if any, would you support?
No, thank you for the question. So, you know, I think the next gun safety measures, the guns safety measures that need to be addressed are the ones that we've been trying to address in the last two, the 2019 and the 2020 session, which is safe storage laws, right? Requiring everybody who has a firearm to use a trigger lock or some sort of other storage to make sure their guns are secured safely. To me, it is a completely sensible law to have on the books, and it should be there, right? If you go down to our Deschutes County Sheriff's Office, there is literally a barrel of trigger locks there that you can have one for free. You don't have to ask any questions. You don't have to check in with anybody, and it's so easy to secure your guns in a safe manner. That is a law that we absolutely need, and we need to also require people to report when they have a firearm that is stolen. You know, the law that was supposed to be voted on twice, didn't get voted on, was to require people to report to law enforcement when their firearm has been stolen within the last 24 hours. You know, as a deputy attorney, I can't tell you how many cases I've read about firearms being stolen, especially from some of the cases I've involved in kids stealing firearms from unlocked cars, and those firearms not being reported to law enforcement in a timely manner. That needs to happen. The Republican walkout stopped both of those, that measure from being voted on in 2019 and again in 2020. The Republican walkout also stopped voting on funding for homeless shelters, vote on climate change, and for a new judge here in Deschutes County. I know Representative Helt didn't walk out in 2020. I really, really wish she would have found a friend of hers to carpool with to work, so we could have had a vote on safe gun storage laws so we could have a safer community.
Thank you very much, Jason. And you have you first on the next question. 6 bills concerning police reform were passed in the Senate Legislature's June special session. Please comment on how effective you feel these reforms will be.
Yeah, police accountability is something that we need to make sure is ingrained in all of our police departments. We need to hold our police to high standards, and I believe that the police accountabilities that were passed in the special sessions are a good step in that direction. You know, there's one bill, and that's the special session that I particularly like, which is requiring officers to report the misconduct of other officers. Now you have to, I think that law is a good law, and that's a policy that Bend Police Department already has on its books, but you also have to make sure you're creating a culture within a police organization so that becomes the norm and not the exception to the rule. And so we got to promote that and make sure those are the cultures in our organizations. I think we also have to do a better job of having officers do the activities that they're trained to do. Too often we ask officers to respond to issues of homelessness or mental health issues or addiction issues, and we have to do a better job to making sure the appropriate safety social services are being in place to address those issues. And when we're talking about police accountability and criminal justice reform, I think you have to take a broader look at that issue as well. I truly believe if we made more investments in education, in affordable housing, and in medical and mental health care for people, we would have a safer and more just community. If we are trying to create safer communities, the first thing we have to do is make sure people's basic needs are being met. We're trying to prevent crisis as opposed to dealing with crisis on the back end, things that I see far too often in my work. We have a lot of work ahead of us in our criminal justice reform, and I'm excited about going to Salem to fight for a more equitable and just justice system.
Thank you very much, Jason. Cheri, you're next. Would you like me to repeat?
Sure, thank you, Kim.
6 bills concerning police reform were passed in the state legislature's June special session. Please comment on how effective you feel these reforms will be.
Thank you for that question. Those bills were all brought forward by the Bypoc caucus that you had mentioned in your earlier question. I supported all of those bills and voted for them. I supported, I didn't officially support all, I'm sorry. I support all of those reforms, and I have voted for all of them, and I am proud to do so. I do think this is the beginning of the conversation, and that we need to work on systemic racism. And we need to continue that work. And I do agree with my opponent on culture. Our work culture matters and is important. And it starts in our own work culture to make sure that each of us has a culture where people feel included and able to work without harassment. And I also think that this bill was important to be able to address the removal of punishments of people who were acting badly. And that is a really big start. I'm working on bringing something forward to our school districts as well, so that when you have a crime of racial injustice, you can also consider that for its own merit. That is very, very important. I also wanted to point out with the gun reform, I ran out of time, but I wanted to talk about the boyfriend loophole, which was a very important safety measure for women that I voted for as well, and that I have a strong history on voting for gun reform. So I wanted to take that time to also, point that out. So thank you.
Thank you, Cheri. And you'll be first on this next question. Bend is the second fastest growing city in the US. Could you explain your favorite law recently passed by the Oregon legislature, or tell us what you would like to see happen in the legislature that seeks to address buildable land supply and affordable housing?
Oh, do I have to pick one, Kim? Because I have 2 that I've brought forward myself.
You've got the full 2 minutes.
Okay. So the first bill that I put forward was a bill to remove for our central district a silly designation of employment. This employment designation means housing can't be built in our 3rd Street corridor area. So I wrote a law and passed it through the House and the Senate to make sure that we had 40 acres that we could repurpose and use in that area to put mixed use development. This will allow walkable housing. This will allow the ability to really repurpose that area and make it much more green and much more usable for people. So I'm very proud of that. The second one is the one that I worked with Mayor Sally Russell and the City of Bend. Inside of our UGB, there was a parcel of land that was owned by the state. The state was refusing to sell this piece of land. So every week we had meetings with the Department of State Lands until we were able to get them to agree to sell the land that we were designated to grow on. It seems silly that if in a state process they told us where to grow, that they were the inhibitor for us to be able to grow there. We were able to sell that piece of property from the state lands into builders' hands, and now that land is in the process of it's been sold, and it will be developing 1,700 homes. Our housing supply is $550,000 at a median cost, and this housing supply will help address that. I've also worked on the missing middle in housing with Speaker Kotek, helped supported and passed a bill on the missing middle, and on my school board days, we were able to sell off surplus property and also remove property from the tax rolls to build affordable housing. So I have a great record on affordable housing, and I want to continue that work. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Jason, same question. Would you like me to repeat?
No, I think I have it. You know, affordable housing is obviously an issue in this community. We have far too many people who are working in this community who can't afford to live here. And I don't believe that's a sign of a healthy community. We have to do all we can to make sure we're building more variety and more types of housing, and especially workforce housing here in Bend. You know, I thought it was really unfortunate that in the February 2020 session, because of the Republican walkout, we weren't able to take a vote on funding for homeless shelters, right? $2.5 million for Deschutes County to have permanent shelter for those in crisis. You know, again, we're in scramble mode as we're approaching winter. That is something we have to find funding for to make sure we're not in scramble mode every winter to find shelter for those who are homeless. You know, I want to talk about a most recent bill. In the last special session, there was a bonding measure to increase funding for affordable housing. Increase it from basically $150 million to $200 million here in Oregon, the LIFT program that helps get affordable housing projects off the ground. Representative Helt voted against that measure. In August at a time when we know how big an issue this is in our community. We actually have 3 projects here in Bend that access funding through the LIFT program. You know, we have to pull our resources and be creative if we're going to tackle this issue. You know, I'm on the Parks Board, and you might say, what does Parks Board have to do with affordable housing? We've waived our permit fees, our service development charges for 400 units of affordable housing. We just was just announced that the Wish Camper, a 200+ unit affordable housing project, was part of the way it got off the ground because Parks waived its SDCs on that. I'm proud to have supported that, and I'm going to support the Parks District to push to waive more of our fees to make sure we are addressing this fundamental issue in this community. We got to make sure we have more units of affordable housing and everybody has a safe place to call home.
Thank you very much. You're going to have the next question first. In 2018, voters overwhelmingly voted down Measure 106, an anti-abortion ballot measure. Knowing our state is overwhelmingly pro-choice from this vote, what can you do to protect access to full range of reproductive health care, including abortion for all?
Right, you know, we have arguably the strongest choice laws and reproductive health laws in the country. And I think it is a testament to the principles of Oregon that those laws exist. But we know that there continues to be challenges to a woman's right to choose, and there continue to be challenges to access reproductive health care. So we have to be steadfast to defend that right and make sure that nothing jeopardizes that right for access to choice and access to reproductive health care. Now, we have those laws, but it's also an issue of having access to reproductive health care and having access to health care in general, especially out in our outlying and rural communities. We have to work to make sure that healthcare exists for everybody. You know, the Republicans on a federal level have been attacking the Affordable Care Act, which potentially jeopardizes thousands of Oregonians' access to healthcare. We need to make sure that we are doing everything we can to fill those potential gaps, to reduce barriers to access to reproductive healthcare and healthcare in general. You know, one of the things I was so surprised to see Representative Helt do was voted against increased funding for internet and broadband in our rural communities, right? She did that during the middle of this COVID pandemic. She voted against funding for internet expansion in our struggling communities at a time when more people are accessing education through the internet, more people are accessing healthcare through the internet, and more people are accessing their livelihoods through the internet. The internet is becoming one of those basic needs that everybody needs to have access to. I'm going to fight to make sure we're protecting our right, the rights of women to have access to reproductive health care that they deserve. And I'm going to fight to make sure everybody has access to the health care that they deserve.
Thank you very much, Jason. Cheri, same question. Would you like me to repeat? Yes? Okay. In 2018, voters overwhelmingly voted down Measure 106, an anti-abortion ballot measure. Knowing our state is overwhelmingly pro-choice from this vote, what can you do to protect access to full range of reproductive health care, including abortion for all?
Thank you for that question. I think that this is probably where my opponent and I agree the most. I am pro-choice, and there's not going to be much difference on that. I would like to, however, address the housing. My opponent brought up the fact that he sits on the Parks Board. One of the biggest barriers for affordable housing in our communities is the Park Board's SDCs. My opponent has sat on there for over a year, and has not done anything about addressing the SDC costs. There's 400 units of affordable housing. There's 100,000 people in our town. This is a very inadequate number. And each home that is built is around a little bit under $9,000. I was shocked to find out that the SDCs were that high. That is a huge prohibitor in our cost for affordable housing. $7,800 for SDC fees from the parks on a mobile home. Mobile homes are one of the most affordable types of housing we have. And I'm wondering when we are going to do something about that, Jason, or are we just going to wait? Because you have the position to be able to change that. You also mentioned that we scramble for a warming shelter. And I'm going to ask something of you today. There's a warming shelter that I think should be put in place on Neff and Hamby Road. It's owned by the Parks Board. And last year when I asked Parks Board members if they would like to put that as a warming shelter, I was told it wasn't our mission. That was not from my opponent, I want to be clear on that. But I do believe that the Parks Board has a big role to play in making sure we have a warming shelter with some of the land, surplus land they own, and the properties they own that are accessible now.
Thank you, Cheri. Cheri, the next question is yours first. What is your position on campaign finance reform, and do you think that lobbyists that now give large amounts of money have undue influence on politics?
Well, I think this, yes, I do. I think this is highly illustrated with what my opponent found himself in today, of returning thousands of dollars from his biggest campaign supporter that has tried to silence a victim of harassment. This is something we have to work on. And I have voted in the legislature for campaign finance reform. Some of them I haven't voted for because they don't actually help. Some of them hurt. You have to be careful of which ones you move forward. I'm not a fan of PACs and moving money around in PACs, so I did not support the one that created more PACs. But I have voted for campaign finance reform. And my opponent has not voted for campaign finance reform. In fact, he is struggling to manage his own campaign finances today. Thank you.
Thank you, Cheri. Jason, same question. What is your position on campaign finance reform, and do you think that lobbyists now give large amounts of money have undue influence on our politics?
I fully support campaign finance reform laws. We need to decrease the influence of money into our campaigns, especially large corporate donors. We need to increase the transparency that happens. We need to know exactly where the money is coming from and who's getting it and how those money is being spent. We have to absolutely do, I'm supportive of an approach to make sure there's limits on campaign finance and to make sure that we increase the transparency. You know, you can start a PAC and you can, call it, I love puppies or something like that, even though you're getting money from the Koch brothers or something like that. We have to make sure we're transparent about who's putting money into those PACs so that people can make real decisions when they're voting and make sure that we're reducing barriers to entry for people to run for office. One of the things I think we need to do is increase, make it so that more people can have voice in their process and not be sort of beholden to large corporate interest. I have a few seconds left. I want to address that question about the parks. Representative Helt, I voted recently against an increase on our parks SDCs, and the city, that allotment of 400 is just about to expire, and the city requested of us to waive more of our SDCs, and I am supportive of that. In the most recent park meeting, I said we need to discuss that, and we need to look for ways of how our parks district can help on our larger community issues. And I agree as well as how can we, if we could potentially help when it comes to warming shelters during the winter. The reality is we need permanent funding for homeless shelters. We're in this scramble mode every year. We certainly have to pitch in and do our part, but we need to have real funding for that. So I agree, and I am supportive of the parks being a part of affordable housing, and I've agreed to support and stand up to waive more of those fees to help tackle this community-wide issue.
Thank you very much, Jason. The next question you'll have first. There has been a disruption of on-site education, making online instruction the norm due to COVID-19. How will you push to ensure adequate high-speed internet connections in rural areas and for low-income households, enabling their children to benefit from this learning mode?
Right. Yeah, no, we know that, I think I addressed it earlier, access to the internet, we're talking about sort of basic, what's our sort of basic needs, and it's incredible how quickly internet has become one of those basic needs for so many people. I have a daughter who's in 3rd grade right now, and I am not a great 3rd grade teacher. I was not a great 2nd grade teacher last spring. I didn't get any better over the summer. And so we got to make sure that we're doing all we can to make sure people have access to the distant learning where our schools can't be open. I just couldn't believe Representative Helt voted against funding to expand internet into our rural communities, right? Now more than ever, and I think going forward in the future, people are going to be accessing education, healthcare, and their livelihood through the internet. We have to make sure that between state funds and federal funds, we're doing all we can to increase those internet services. I mean, think about it. If you live in Burns, Oregon right now, you can be seeing a medical provider from just about anywhere. You can be seeing a mental health provider just about anywhere. You can have a livelihood and a job just about everywhere right now. And I think that's going to be more and more of our future, even after we open up after this COVID pandemic. We have to increase that level of access. I talked about schools. Of course, I want schools to be open. I want our kids to be safe. I want our teachers to be safe. And while we're distance learning, we need to make sure everybody has access to the internet so they can be a full participant in our education systems, our healthcare systems, and our economy.
Thank you very much, Jason. Cheri, would you like me to repeat the question?
No, I'm good. Thanks, Kim. So this is something that I have been working on for over 6 years, making sure that our kids have access to technology. I ran for the school board to make sure that our kids had access to technology. I'm not someone that's going to sit here and talk to you about what should be done. I've actually got in and did what I wanted to be done and worked with our community members, my fellow board members, our administrators, and our teachers. When I ran for the school board, I wanted to make sure that we had access to technology. And we hired a administrative position to bring forward iPads and put iPads in the hands of kids 3rd through 12th grade. We did that also. We worked with Ben Broadband to make sure we had access. And we had that in place. We did it for cost neutral. What we had to do, what the problem was that was facing us was replacing textbooks. We had outdated textbooks. They were $5 million to replace. So over 4 years, we took that money and put it into technology so that our children would never have outdated textbooks. I love to think outside of the box. I love to stretch the box and imagine the box. This is an example of pushing forward a real solution that works for our district. We now have all of our kids are now connected to digital learning, which I didn't know would be what we were preparing for, but we are prepared for this. In our state, I have been convening, I am the connectivity liaison for the House of Representatives to our school boards, our district, our education department of the state. And with that, I have been working with all of our broadband providers to bring forward broadband connections for all of our kids. These connections are happening with our ESDs, and we are working hard on getting that to happen.
Thank you, Cheri. You'll have the next question. When a COVID-19 vaccine is approved by the scientific community, getting a high enough percentage of the population vaccinated is necessary for it to be successful, up to 90%. How will you support policies that ensure children are vaccinated for COVID-19 and other communicable diseases?
Thank you for that question, Kim. No one has worked harder and more diligently on vaccine legislation than myself. I have taken on science deniers to make sure our children are protected from dangerous diseases. And this has come at a great cost. It was a very contentious battle inside of the legislature, and I was able to pass that through the House. And something that my opponent likes to talk about a lot is the Republican walkout. I am not only a Republican, but I'm an independent nominee, and I've been the independent nominee twice, and I'm proud of that. That's not something that my opponent's going to talk about, though, because it doesn't fit into his political talking points. But what happened with the first walkout was my bill was the bill that died because of the walkout. So I have not only stood up to my party to pass legislation, I have also had the repercussions of not having bills that I have brought forward pass because of that as well. So I know what it's like to stand up against your party, and I know what it's like to pass vaccine legislation. And let me tell you, it takes a lot of courage and it takes a lot of strength to stand up to people and say, no, this is important. And it's not about just saying yes. It's not about saying yes to a party and being partisan, which my opponent is very good at. He hasn't told his party no yet. But when there is a COVID vaccine, we're gonna have to make sure that the science is strong and sound. And I am going to work with public health officials and our community. Dr. Conway is our local public health director, and him and I have a call every other Friday with other officials in the public health department, and I will make sure that this is vetted before we move forward, or I support that. And I want to make sure the political process does not get in the way of that.
Thank you, Cheri, very much. Jason, same question. Would you like me to repeat?
No, thanks, Kim. Yeah, I am hopeful that a safe vaccine can be created and replicated and distributed as quickly as possible, so we can begin the process of recovering from COVID and all the collateral consequences of this global health pandemic. You know, I want to make sure that we have a process that is safe for those vaccines, so that we can have confidence that when we go out and ask people to vaccinate themselves and their children, that everybody is being safe. So I am going to support vaccinations when they are readily available and safe, and follow the science on that to make sure that we can have a safe and healthy community. You know, I am also a supporter of vaccines, and I understand what Representative Helt was saying, that her bill died because of, or one of the bills that she supported died because of the walkout. I mean, the measure of a lawmaker is effectiveness. Can they, if there is something that they believe in, can they get something done? You know, I know Representative Helt showed up in February but I don't think she stood up. I don't think she reached in, and I was just so frustrated during that walkout to see her not be able to bring a colleague to work with her to vote on those critical bills. That's not being effective. Because of that, we're not able to get votes on housing for homeless people. We're not able to get votes on climate change. We're not able to get votes on gun safety. And we weren't able to get a vote on a vaccine bill. It's not about partisan, what party you're on. It's about being effective and making sure you're getting things done that benefit our community.
Thank you so much, Jason. Jason, you'll have the next question. How would you describe Oregon's climate issues, and why or why not do you think that it is human-caused climate change that is a contributing factor?
We are in the middle of a climate change crisis. The wildfires on the western slope of the Cascades are another reminder that we're beyond talking about climate change, and it's time to take real action to combat it. I grew up in the town of Molalla, which is a little timber town on the western slope that was evacuated because of these wildfires. I couldn't believe it. It was nothing that I had experienced as a kid growing up in that town. 4,000 people lost their homes because of these wildfires. We have to take real action on climate change now. Representative Helt voted against climate change legislation in 2019, and again, she said she'd vote against it in 2020. That climate change legislation had put caps on our emissions so that we were protecting this environment. It actually had money for wildfire mitigation to make sure our forests were healthier and were less likely to suffer catastrophic fire. Money and targeted funding, the largest investments in wildfire prevention in state's history that would help protect communities like Bend and my hometown of Molalla. You know, there is a young student at OSU Cascades right now who's studying energy systems engineering. And that young person could be part of our future, part of our community's future to have a clean energy and more sustainable economy. But we need to support that young person's endeavors. Bend has a number of different people working in these fields of clean energy already. If we gave a little bit of push and a little bit of investment, Bend could be this incubator. It could be this innovation hub to help us have a more sustainable, robust, and clean energy economy. What I love about the climate change legislation that had been proposed was not just limiting our emissions, but investing resources in that sort of infrastructure and jobs and industry to promote a safer and more healthy community. I love living in Bend. We have to protect this place.
Thank you very much. Cheri, same question. Would you like me to repeat?
No, I'm good. Thank you, Kim. I believe climate change is real. I believe that we need to do everything that we can. Jason's referring to the cap and trade policy, which is too expensive. We are in the middle of a global pandemic, and I will not vote, and I showed up to vote against this bill multiple times. We cannot raise the cost of heating to where people on fixed incomes cannot afford it. We cannot raise gas where people in working jobs and living wages, living paycheck to paychecks, cannot get to their jobs. We need to make sure that we are doing everything that we need to do. This policy had imperceptible impacts on carbon emissions. Imperceptible, but it had huge impacts on everybody that is struggling and working paycheck to paycheck and trying to move their families forward and keep going. I will not bring forward policies that burden us, especially during a global pandemic and during an economic crisis. You can count on me to look at the unintended consequences for you inside of your home when you look around your kitchen table. But what I will do is bring forward policies that will help. I have voted to ban fracking in Oregon for 10 years. I voted to ban oil drilling offshore for 10 years. I voted for removing dirty diesels off of our state highways. I have voted for a bill to bring back the Department of Environmental Quality Standards from the Obama era and reject Trump's policies. I have done things to impact our climate. I also pay extra every month at my business to make sure we have clean energy at Zydeco.
Thank you very much, Cheri. The next question, Cheri, you'll be first on, as long as I'm doing this right. What can the Oregon legislature do to help the homeless in Oregon?
Oh, that is a great question. I want to talk about our homeless youth. I have brought forward a bill 6 times, 6. I know you're wondering how that's possible in a 2-year session, but we have had special sessions. So every time we have a special session, I bring forward the bill. This bill is to fund our homeless youth. We fund our homeless youth at 92 cents a day. It is absolutely deplorable. And I have brought forward this bill to get funding for second home programs to make sure that our kids are not on the street. We have lost shelter beds across our state during this global pandemic. We have not protected them, and their funding has not increased at all. So on Friday of last week, part of the bill that I've brought forward was a study to really define what was needed. And that study, we were able to find some money inside of our budget to be able to have Human Services be able, DHS be able to fund this study, and they are now working on that study. I am looking forward to March when that study comes back, because there is no one that is a stronger advocate for our homeless youth. And around our homeless bill, I have, in the last special session, I passed an amendment to make sure that we could build our Veterans Village that I have been working on in a bipartisan way with Barb Campbell and Bruce Abernathy and all of our county commissioners and COVO and Bend Heroes Foundation to make sure that we can get people off of the streets. We had a meeting just yesterday, and we are talking about being able to have people in that homeless shelter in December as we continue to build and work through the sewer issues. But I am proud of all of the work that I've done around our homeless. Thank you.
Thank you, Cheri. Jason, what can the Oregon Legislature do to help the homeless in Oregon?
Right, so, you know, it is hard to have stability and security and safety in your life if you don't have a place to live. And we have to do a better job of making sure people have access to shelter. So I think there's sort of two parts to this. One, state funding to make sure every community has permanent shelters for those in crisis. So funding to make sure we have those shelters in place so we can have safe places for people to be when they're in crisis. Then also create a continuum of housing and more expansive affordable housing so we can help people move from shelter to more permanent type of housing situations, more workforce housing, and then incentive programs to help people save to become homeowners themselves. So we have to not only provide money for shelters, we have to make sure that we're providing funding and tax incentives to build those other types of housing we know to help people get more permanent type housing. The other piece of it is taking a holistic look at our people in this community that are in crisis, right? Housing has to be that first issue, but we also have to make sure that we're making investments in other social safety net programs and social service programs to help them stay out of crisis, right? We know we underfund our drug and alcohol addiction services here in Bandon and Oregon. We know we underfund our medical, that we don't have, not everybody has access to medical care. And we know that not everybody has access to mental health care. And we know that people are food insecure. We have to take a holistic approach on how we're gonna create stability, right? I read a study recently that because of underfunding in our mental health and substance abuse programs, it costs the state something like $6 billion in loss of productivity, emergency room visits, jail stays, and all the other collateral consequences of being in crisis. We have to make real investments in helping people be safe and stable. And if we did that, we would live in a better community. So it's about looking at the holistic picture of people and making sure we're doing all we can to help them. I went over. Sorry about that.
Yeah, it's okay. I interrupt. And this will be the last question, and you get to do it first,
Sure.
Answer first. The League of Women Voters and City Club feel very strongly about civil discourse. What do you think can be done to reverse the polarization of political parties and citizens in our nation?
Right. I think that's a great question to end on. Thank you. Yeah, we have become more and more divisive in the last 4 years, especially, and we're seeing the consequence of that play out all the time. You know, I guess two things that I'm hoping to rely upon to make me an effective legislator. One, you know, a good idea is a good idea, regardless if it comes from Republican or Democrat or working family party or independent, or no matter what side of the mountains it comes on. You have to make sure you have an open mind to make sure that we are looking for all possible solutions for our biggest challenges. The other thing I talk about, I grew up in Malala, which is a little timber town, about 3,000 people when I was a kid. And I graduated high school there in 1988. So the 80s, especially people who lived in Bend at that time, that's when the bottom really fell out of the timber industry. So I saw so many people in my community lose their livelihoods, so many people in my community not feeling heard as Oregon was evolving and moving and growing its economy past timber. I felt so many of my people not feeling part of the decision-making process and really feeling left behind. And that has always stuck with me. And that is a lesson that I'm going to take with me to Salem, which is this. You got to make sure everybody is engaged in our process. You have to make sure everybody's voices is heard and everybody has a seat at the decision-making table. We're only going to end our divisiveness if we make sure everybody is engaged and has voice, and to make sure that all four, you know, everybody throughout this state has part of this process to help move our Oregon forward. You know, we're only going to tackle our biggest challenges if we tap into the talent and viewpoints and experiences of everybody here in Oregon. And I'm hopeful, with my background growing up in that small timber town, one of those rural communities that are struggling right now, that experience will help me be an effective legislator and help bridge some of those gaps that we see here in Oregon.
Thank you very much, Jason. Cheri, the League of Women Voters and City Club feel very strongly about civil discourse. What do you think can be done to reverse the polarization of the political parties and citizens in our nation?
Thank you so much for that, Kim. I really have a lot to say on this topic. One, I am a representative that has been nominated by two parties during two different elections. I am very proud to have the Independent Party nomination and the Republican nomination. What that says about me is that I don't fit nicely in a box. I believe in small government. I believe in making sure that we're fiscally responsible, but I also believe in social inclusive policies, and I'm pro-choice. I don't support our president. I never have. I didn't vote for him in 2016. I don't think he is fit to be president, and I have spoke out about that. It takes a lot of courage to stand up to your own party, and I have done that over and over again. When my party walked out, I did not. When I oppose the president that is from one of the parties that I represent, I don't support him. I speak out. It is really easy to go along and speak partisan politics, but that's not who I am. And I am not afraid to use my voice. I'm not afraid to take on powerful entities with my voice, and I've done that. And that's how we're going to be able to get more moderate policies inside of our legislature. That's why I've brought forward moderate policies. Most people agree with my policies because they're right down the middle. It's really important that we stay in the middle, and we have to protect people that are in the middle. We have to make sure that we don't allow them to get hit in the middle of the road, because I like to say the only thing that happens in the middle is you get hit by a car. I like to be in that middle. That's where I live. I don't have my party's affiliation on my yard sign. That's offensive to me.
Thank you, Cheri, and I want to thank both of the candidates for answering all of those questions. You both did a great job and made it very interesting. We will now move on to our final remarks. Cheri, you go first with your 2 minutes of closing statement. Cheri, you're going to go first.
Sorry, there was a little pop-up screen that moved my mute button. Thank you, Kim. Well, first I want to talk about what we need to do. We are in the middle of a healthcare pandemic, and we are also in the middle of an economic crisis, and we're in the middle of a systemic racism crisis. I believe that I am the best representative to take on those crises. I have small business experience. We need to support our small businesses to get through this crisis. No one knows better on what it feels like to be hit by this crisis. I went in my restaurant, we went down 90% in sales overnight. We needed to make sure that we had healthcare benefits for my employees. This is not a talking point. This is not a political talking point for me. This is something that I have lived through and that I have done. This is a test that I have been given. When we were faced with being closed and losing 90% of our sales, my husband and I chose to pull out money out of savings to make sure that our employees had health.
Cheri?
Representative Helt, when you were saying you said something like my husband and I, and then we stopped hearing you.
And then, yeah. Can you do mute?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. I think maybe it's just a poor connection. I have 2 online learners, so I apologize for that. It does take up some bandwidth. My husband and I, do I get to have more time or no more time?
I believe Scott froze it while you were not being able to talk, so I think that
okay.
kind of added some time for you.
So my husband and I have prioritized making sure that our employees have healthcare benefits, even when we were faced with losing 90% of our sales. And I want to bring that voice to the legislature. We need to make sure that we have people in the legislature that knows what it feels like to stand up for their employees, to stand up for benefits. We need to make sure that we have people in the legislature that know what it feels like to work on a school board or volunteer on a school board for 8 years and fight for education for our kids. And I want to bring that voice. We need summer school to make sure we make up for a lost year of education for our children. I want to be that voice in Salem.
Thank you very much, Cheri. Jason, you can go, and we're going to give you an extra 15 minutes to finish since Cheri got about that. Thank you very much. Go ahead,
Sure.
Jason.
All right, well, thank you, Kim, again, for having me. Thank you, League of Women Voters. Thank you, City Club, and thank you, Representative Helt, for participating in this as well. You know, I love living in Bend, and I feel so fortunate to be able to raise my family here. You know, I am a product of Oregon public education, from high school to college to law school. And I am so grateful for the investment that Oregon made in me. And I've honored that investment by choosing a career of service, working as a public defender, and for the last 15 years, working as a deputy district attorney here in Bend. You know, working on cases involving, you know, standing up for people who've been victims of crime, working on cases of domestic violence, working on cases of sexual violence, and a large part of my career has been working on cases involving kids, both as a public defender and as a deputy district attorney, working on cases involving abused and neglected kids. I've also honored that investment in me by being a school volunteer here in Bend for the last 18 years, coaching high school mock trial and running to be on the Parks Board. You know, I ran on the Parks Board to make sure that all kids have access to a healthy and active lifestyle. And I've been on a nonprofit board for nearly 10 years, advocating on behalf of kids in foster care. You know, Representative Helt said all the right things before she got over to Salem. And that's why I was so disappointed when she voted against school funding, voted against school funding to help our most struggling kids. She voted against climate change to protect this beautiful place. She voted against affordable housing, and she voted against access and expansion of internet services in our state. You know, I heard Representative Helt say, too much, costs too much. What costs too much is when we have a school system that doesn't work for every kid. What costs too much is what we just saw over on the western slope of the Cascades when the wildfires devastated huge towns. We need to make real investments in Oregon and Oregonians so that we can have a better future. We deserve better, and that's why I'm running to represent Bend. Less than 2 minutes.
Excellent.
Right
Good
on
job.
the line.
You both did great. Thank you. That was the end of our questions and the end of our final statements. We want to give thanks to the State Representative District 54 candidates, Jason Kropf and Cheri Helt, for participating in today's forum. We appreciate the burden of committing to run for office, and our goal is to provide an opportunity for fair and civil discourse. The Oregon House of Representatives District 54 is the donut. And unluckily, I already said that. Sorry. We will start. And I got them mixed up. I am so sorry. That's what you get paid. That's what you get when you pay for a volunteer. Anyway, remember, if you enjoyed today's forum, thanks. You're very kind, both of you. Thank you. Remember, if you enjoyed today's forum and would like to help cover the cost, please consider making a donation to City Club on their website at cityclub.co.org. If you're interested in becoming a member or making a contribution to the League of Women Voters of Deschutes County, please contact the League through their website at lwvdeschutes.org. Thanks again to our Candidate Forum Series sponsors, the Deschutes Public Library and Buchanan Schmidt LLC. The next candidate forum will be Sisters City Councilor Candidates, which will air on Tuesday, October 14th at 7 p.m. Please be sure to watch. Thank you again to our candidates, and thank you for your interest and in keeping democracy alive. This was pre-recorded.